Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we're excited to have back on the show professional astrologer and tarot card reader and friend and colleague, Brad Kronen, who was last on the show, I think it was February of 2019, talking about relationship. And I'm particularly excited to have him on because I've known Brad for many years, and we're going to be talking about the Pluto Return coming that's going to be in the U.S. chart. And he has this way of seeing the big picture. He's great with the history and astrology and his knowledge of all of that. I thought he'd be just a wonderful guest to give us more insight on it and how to handle it. He's also, by the way, a prolific writer. And from what I can tell, he's written at least 23 books from what I can tell, maybe more. And I've certainly read some of them. And you can even see by the titles, which, by the way, they're all available on Amazon, that his first book that came out, I did want to mention, was Love in the Stars, Find Your Perfect Match. And that one came out through, I think, Llewellyn. But he's also published ones on specific historic events and people. And I really, really want you to take a look at them on Amazon under his name. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show this week. I'm excited to have Brad on. We've been friends a long time. We've got some great shows coming up. We have coming up Dan Moore next week, our Kabbalist friend, and we're going to talk Kabbalah stuff and some of the stuff he's been up to. And then we have Renee Starr, who's a Wiccan, and that's going to be a lot of fun. We've been looking forward to having her for a long time. She's a good friend as well. And then the end of the month, Krista and I are going to do our own show and maybe something on tarot. We haven't quite fully decided yet. Since we have some tarot classes coming up in September, we're going to do another series of classes. So if you're interested in taking our classes in Kabbalah and tarot, get a hold of us through the website and sign up. We'll give you all the information. So it should be a lot of fun. We always keep the classes small and we give a lot of personal attention to everyone. While you're on the website, again, if you can afford it, give us a coffee on Ko-Fi, buy us a coffee. It's great, helps us with our production costs. Make sure you subscribe to the show, which is one of the best things you can do to help us actually to grow. And then if you're out and about, don't forget, you can also listen to us on Spotify and iTunes as a podcast, so you don't have to be tied to YouTube. And if you're on the car on your road trip and you want to listen to us, then we're available. So wherever you get your podcast. So I don't want to take up any more of your time, so I'm going to kick it back over to Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thanks, Michael. And welcome, Brad. We're really happy to have you.
Hi, Krista. Thanks for having me again. I really like being here.
Oh, great. So before we get started, can you share with us which chart that you'll be using that represents the U.S.? Just maybe a description of it a little bit.
On AstroDeans or Astro.com, it's called the USA 1 chart, which is like a lot of people reference this chart overall. It's the standard prototype of the USA national chart.
Great. And I picked that one just because I trusted Astro.com, and then I did some research. I was like, oh, okay, I'm glad I picked it, because there are different charts. I thought it might be nice. Well, first of all, let's talk about just when this is going to happen, and then maybe a little bit also just about what Pluto represents in any chart.
Sure. So Pluto will be in the same place in the sky as it was initially when the United States first formed on July 4th, 1776. And it will be in the same place in the sky this upcoming February 20th of 2022. I had to think about that for a second. Pluto is, of course, the furthest planet out in the solar system. It's furthest away from the sun. Technically, it's been downgraded to a dwarf planet. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's an actual planet, and I think it has just as much um, just as much verification and traits as the other planets which are closest to the sun. And Pluto represents transformational change overall. This is like a planet that deals with major life events, life changes overall. It doesn't deal with anything lighthearted or trivial. It's a very hardcore planet, and technically it's named after the Roman god of the underworld, Hades or Pluto, if you want to call him that. And so it deals with very life or death situations and transformative change where our lives are seen as like a Plutonian event can be like a marker in our lives overall. It's a very heavy duty planet and it's very significant all the same.
And it has been in. We'll describe a little to people that don't have the chart. It has been the sign of Capricorn for some time now, and in the United States chart, it's the natal Pluto is at 27 degrees and how many minutes? 33.
33.
And it's also retrograde in this chart in the second house, which is all to me quite significant. So let's talk a little bit about what it's like just for the fact that we have that natal position in that chart and what does that represent?
So the second house is technically an earthy house. It is naturally ruled by the sign of Taurus, and it's called the house of money, the money house, or the house of material assets overall. So Pluto is in an earthy house and an earthy sign. Capricorn is itself the last of the earth signs. So there's a double emphasis on the tangible. Earth signs function first and foremost where they see, touch, taste, and feel the tangible world. Their senses are used the most with what is in front of them, that type of thing. So with Pluto there, it's like a real emphasis on the actual material assets of the chart overall.
And that's totally been happening. And just to repeat for Joel wanted to know, he just entered on the chat room when the Pluto return is. It's February 20th, 2022 exact. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the retrograde aspects of it later in the show. But you can see, even it seems like from my point of view, when Pluto first entered Capricorn, the whole Wall Street and the movement with the financial thing against the banks in the United States and the economic crisis that's been connected to the pandemic, that this has definitely been a very strong theme.
Well, and do you know what event happened like 1 week after Pluto entered Capricorn?
Was that the 9/11?
Bernie Madoff's sons called the FBI, basically saying their father told them their company was one big lie. So it's the biggest Ponzi scheme in history of
that's
Bernie
right.
Madoff.
I was thinking about when it crossed the ascendant in Sagittarius, Pluto. So that was the 9/11 was before Capricorn. But no, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Whenever Pluto changes signs, I have I call it personally, it leaves a calling card of like warning at first. So that was like the first event that happened with Pluto entered Capricorn, because Capricorn is the sign of I call it the sign of the corporate. It's the sign of traditionalism. It's the sign of organization and structure. And so with Pluto crossing there, it was a warning to society as a whole. Like greed cannot continue much further on this level. Hence, Bernie Madoff was arrested and put to jail.
You know, it was interesting when I was doing, I got fascinated with the United States chart about 2 years ago, and I go in and out of looking at, but I looked up Rudyard's view of the second house. And that's such a great book. I mean, philosophically, it's just a little like more, I think, philosophical than some of the house books. And he talks about, there's a quote about man's possessions and how we get things and how we accumulate things. And it seems to me that Pluto return is maybe to kind of look into whether or not how we acquire our wealth and our possessions. Are we doing this in a way that is fair or fits with our values? So it seems like, I know that the second house can also be related to values sometimes.
Oh yeah, big time. It's a Venus ruled house. The planet Venus rules the second house. And so we think of the mythology behind the goddess Venus. We think of like value, justice, things like that. But love has a cost or has a price, shall we say. It's not something to be taken lightly like Pluto.
It's really true, and so there's other things going on in the chart around. So let me ask you first: what are your thoughts about the actual fact that it's retrograde in the United States chart? How does that differ from if it was not retrograde?
Well, Pluto is so very, very far away from the sun that half the year, 6 months out of any given year, is retrograde motion, which from our perspective, so retrograde has to do with our perspective on Earth looking up at the sky. So when something is retrograde, it's considered like backwards, moving backwards or backwards through time. But so a lot of the planets are retrograde when you look at any given chart with Pluto or anything Pluto related. So I don't consider retrograde that significant a deal in interpreting Pluto overall. But when it's naturally retrograde in a birth chart overall, I would say that the person, so whenever something is retrograde, it goes internally within. So the energy goes in first before it goes outwards. So I would say that person or that country in particular, they're very pensive with considering things before they take any action going forward.
Well, that would be good advice if people could listen to that.
Yeah, exactly. I speak a little too prematurely on that one. Mm-hmm.
So, I think that I wanted to start looking at least a couple years ahead because, I know it's a slow transit for a reason, and so that we can kind of dig a little deeper. But it seems like we're getting closer. So do you think it's going to have more like something outwardly will happen to help us to, I guess, pay more attention to what's happening in Pluto on sort of a national level, and what kinds of things could happen? And also, how would a person work positively, even now with some of the things that are going on? How can we do something actually positive internally so that we can handle things better?
That's a great question. So when I first saw the Pluto return, I saw it was happening in an Earth house and an Earth sign, and I thought, oh, some sort of natural disaster, or because Pluto deals with destruction or death per se, but only for the purpose of transformational change. So I would think there might be some sort of natural disaster, or dare I say an earthquake, because it's the double earth emphasis. But that could be the trigger that we need to unite ourselves as one country overall.
So it's interesting. There are also people I've talked to that think it'd be better if the country split up at this point. And in my opinion, too, also, it's the first retrograde under the formation of the United States. Obviously, there was a country before here, which would be fascinating if you could talk to the elders of some of the tribes. What happened? Was there any themes playing out over every, 248 years or something? Pluto comes back to that same position. Mm-hmm. But I sort of lost my train of thought there. I can't remember what I was thinking about. Oh, well. But I think that I also wanted to note that there's, on a different note, that there's also some planets in aspect to Pluto that are interesting to me. So, for instance, Mercury looks like it's opposed in the 8th house. And I thought that was interesting because there's a real interest in the occult in the United States. It has a big history, and especially like the whole ghost thing is really blossoming right now. And also we've done a lot of research, a lot more than people realize. There's a lot more scientific research into magic and psychicism that's actually quite legitimate. And then it's opposing Pluto. So I'd be interested to see what you thought about that. And it looks like it's in the sign of Cancer.
Whenever I see a planet in Capricorn and it being like a questionable planet like Pluto or Uranus or anything like that, Capricorn is the sign of the economy overall, if you want to look at it that way. So with Pluto there, it would indicate some sort of economic challenge or obstacle that approaches, especially with the return happening. So, and what speaks in this country? Money, of course, the most. But it makes me wonder, like, what financial crisis is coming during 2022 overall. And the other thing I noticed with our chart is how big the seventh house is and how many planets are within it. We have, like, I think 4 planets in the seventh house, and the seventh house is the house of partnership overall. Technically, it's considered the house of marriage, but partnership is what's key. And considering the president before this one, the one we currently have, sought to undo all of our alliances with key partnerships the United States had, it's very interesting to note how imperative partnerships are to the United States astrologically.
That is fascinating. We're a huge Cancerian country, which negatively I can kind of see some of it more than positively sometimes. Like, the whole like family values, that could be a negative Cancerian trait. And I speak as a Cancerian, but there's a lot of potential because Jupiter is in Cancer, and
Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. It's his best possible sign in Cancer, by the way.
And we have that. So I was sort of thinking like maybe we really are a baby country because we haven't realized even our sun potential, it seems to me that.
Yeah.
So maybe we have to be a little gentle on ourselves in that maybe there is more potential for good than I thought, because there's a lot of, there's some hard aspects for sure, but there's a lot of good things too in the chart.
Saturn is exalted as well as Jupiter. Saturn is in its best possible sign in Libra, and it's in its own ruling house, the 10th house. Neptune is very good in the 9th house. That could be a problematic thing too. But overall, Jupiter and Saturn are in the signs of their exaltation. They're the best possible signs they function in. So it's very good.
And then speaking of Neptune, that same month, we have a Neptune opposition. So we have Neptune has been in Pisces for a while, and it's pretty close to being exact. And I believe there's a trine between Neptune and Pluto in the U.S. chart. So it seems like Neptune has something to say about the Pluto return.
Yeah, well, Neptune is in its ruling sign. It rules Pisces naturally. So it's quite powerful with where it is in the sky right now as we speak. And when it's opposing its natal Neptune, it's like, oh, well, reality. So Neptune deals with unreality. So when there's a Neptune opposition going on, it's about things being questioned that are realistically based or that everyone assumes is a part of the tangible everyday world.
What's interesting is, my take on, and I'm not a professional astrologer like you are, but it seems like Neptune in Virgo, which is the natal position for the U.S., is a little difficult. And wouldn't that sort of indicate some of that Puritanism that goes on in this country?
Absolutely. And it's in the 9th house. The 9th house is the house of idealism. So that when Neptune's there, we can really have a blind eye with how we see ourselves overall to the rest of the world. So
and then also Virgo could be connected to health and healing, and so perhaps some of the pandemic is somewhat connected not just to Pluto but to the Neptune transit.
Absolutely. Well, I did a whole article on the history of pandemics in basically human history, but they have to do with whenever Jupiter and the planet Pluto are in cardinal signs. That's when we see pandemics emerge throughout history.
Oh, I didn't know the part about the Jupiter being in the car. I knew that because it was in Capricorn during that conjunction period. That was a critical thing, but I didn't realize
we had like 5 planets in Capricorn, and Pluto and Jupiter were part of that.
So another interesting aspect connected to the U.S. chart, to me, that sort of ties in what I was going to say that I forgot to say about the Pluto in the 2nd house and Pluto return, is it seems like it's a good time for all of us as citizens of the United States to sit down and think about where our country has been since the founding, whether we agree with what the direction is right now, and particularly in a very non-judgmental way, say, what would I want to see different in terms of the foundational values of the U.S.
Yeah.
And then we have that, what brings me to say we have that Chiron and Aries in the fourth house. And I think they tie together a little bit, the wound, literally the wound, how we built the country, but then really, how do we collectively determine the next steps of where we want this country to go, our values? This is like, to me, more of an inner process.
Well, and when I look at a country's chart, I look at both the sun and the moon. So the sun is like how a country works overall, but the moon is how its people function or how its people think overall. So the moon is in Aquarius in the United States chart, and I love that placement very much because it trines all the Gemini planets with Mars and Uranus there, and it's really a great place for the moon to be overall because it's the planet of the American people, shall we say.
Well, you could also argue that perhaps there's some way that America is supposed to be part of the Aquarian age with the moon in Aquarius, that we're meant to participate in it in some fashion.
And with all the planets in the seventh house, we're meant to be a global superpower. The thing that so disturbed me about the administration before this one was that they were cutting off all their ties to like people like the Great Britain and allies we have long been connected with. And it was trying to be as isolationist as possible, and it was very worrisome.
That's such a good point. And, it's funny because I know Trump is a Gemini, right? So I don't know what degree, if he's like near the descendant though. And you have that Uranus in Gemini and the chart of the US too. So that sort of, I thought, struck me at the time. And you're right, we're meant to be in a good way, I think. So even humanitarian way, we're meant to be out there in the world, but not in sort of the more Plutonian way where we're doing it to extract wealth from countries.
And the moon in Aquarius is like, we're meant to be a melting pot of multiple cultures over and over and over again. So much so that like has nothing to do with homogeny whatsoever. It has to do with as many different parts of the pie being dealt with different sources and different cultures, different peoples, all the above.
And to do that, one of the things that has been a problematic for everyone is because of the invention of social media, we are communicating in ways that are not necessarily productive. And we've all done some of it. I know I have, and because it's so fast. So it's not necessarily a bad technology, but what do you think would help if I was to look at the chart? Where does that come from in the U.S. chart? Is there, something that we can do to evolve more so that we play more on the positive end of social media? Because it seems like it's also spread a lot of lies.
Yeah, right. Well, like I said, the moon reflects its people of a country or culture, and the moon in Aquarius we're in the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius is the technological sign. It's the futuristic sign. So it's also very detached emotionally. It's probably the most emotionless of the signs. And with the moon there, it's like it really makes us focus on being as distant and removed in an air signish way mentally, so that we're not as connected to each other as we should be. And we need to be more connected emotionally, sensitively, all the above. So it's focusing on the moon itself and how we see our country overall. With the moon in Aquarius is like pride in our development, our advancement, and Aquarius rules science as well. So scientific advancement is definitely a part of all this too.
Yeah, when I did a little bit of research on some of the facts of the inventions here, Twitter was invented in the United States. So that fits with, to me, the third house moon, so you're right with the technology, and certainly technology has really helped in so many ways. It's really actually helped in the pandemic. People can work at home and Zoom and all of that, But maybe some of it comes back to that, Mercury in the eighth house. So,
Well, anyone born with Mercury in the eighth, they're called serious thinkers. They're called deep water runs. I forgot the phraseology behind it, but still waters run very deep. So in other words, like they may not be too vocal about it, but they're deep thinkers all the same.
mhm.
So that's the interpretation with a Mercury in the eighth house. The eighth house is the house of transformational change. It's the Scorpio house, and it's like life and death issues. It doesn't like small talk. It does very serious, heavy duty issues to grapple with.
So that would sort of indicate, and this is actually true if you're a reader like I am, there's actually a lot of really interesting, thoughtful books out there on pretty much every topic in the U.S. that I think they're popular enough that are in print, but that people don't know about. But I do think there's actually a lot more. People think that people aren't reading. That's not true. Readers still read, and if their books are selling, but there is, of course, sometimes the dumbing down of things because people, if you only do social media, it affects your brain. You have to keep up the muscle in the brain by reading books.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but I think there are still some depth in the United States, but I think, unfortunately, on the surface, what you see and hear with the news and things, you have to dig a little deeper to get to the real articles and interesting writers and things.
The thing that really stands out with this chart that's really, I think, fantastic is the Sagittarius ascendant. So the chart ruler of the entire chart for the United States is the planet Jupiter, which is called the Great Benefic. It's the largest planet in the solar system, and it represents luck, growth, abundance overall. And so the Hindus believe that if a person or a place or a thing has Sagittarius on the ascendant and Jupiter as the chart ruler, they've done a lot of karmic good in past lives to earn that. So hence it sees the rewards take place with Jupiter as the chart ruler. Overall, a country that has Jupiter as the chart ruler has an overall sense of good luck and good timing. Timing is the most important thing overall. So hence, Americans get so gung-ho about it's the greatest country in the world, blah, 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 but they don't really know why or like exactly what makes us stand out from the rest. But it really is a Jupiterian factor of good luck overall.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about how, this is a personal question, how does rulership really work in the chart? Like, I understand, what it is, but how does it actually operate? So this planet is the ruler. So does it have like more say in the chart, so to speak?
Yeah, it oversees the entire chart. So Jupiter is like the very positive planet that sees almost like the bright side to things a little bit too much. So it has to do with all good stuff, good positive energy, very optimistic. It's a planet of optimism overall. So it's very good to have as a chart ruler.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I would say that I can see both the shadow and the positive side of that. So what positively, I think what the Pluto return does for me is it draws attention to, again, going back to the idea like, okay, supposedly we are this great country, but don't we have to look at our wrongs and fix them? And so whether it's slavery, whether it is how we treated the indigenous and native people here, and these are coming out more. I think there's still a lot more, especially with the Native Americans and the women, especially with the murdered women, and that's coming. And then the children, they're finding the bodies in the schools that they were forced to go to. I think it's really horrible, but I'm glad it's coming out to, if we can face it and deal with it, I think it's a chance to really, like you had said, I don't know before, about to really heal this country.
And it's very indicative of a Pluto return, by the way, these things happening before it takes place.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not like, there were people that have known about it, but it's becoming more collectively known, it seems like. You can't, and that again, well, that is thanks to social media, that we can spread positive influences or negative influence, but it's very painful. I mean, there's no way around it.
The interesting thing is, I see that through the planets in Gemini, Mars in Gemini and Uranus in Gemini, where it's like, so Mars is the combative planet, Uranus is the nonconformist. And it was like, well, Gemini rules over the third house, which is the house of one's local neighborhood. So with Mars and Uranus there, it's like, well, if you want to be one of us, that's fine and great. Just look and act like us and don't stick out like a sore thumb, or else you're going to really not be one of us and we're going to let you know it.
I see what you mean. Definitely. So what other things in the one thing I did want to talk about too, you'd mentioned before the show too, is the fact, that Pluto is going to be going retrograde, and there's still a couple of times in which it goes direct again. And so this is again a very slow process with Pluto. And the dates, I think, were July 12th and December 28th of 2022.
So it hits the point that Pluto was in when the chart was first cast in February 20th of 2022, and then it goes retrograde and crosses over that same point again in July of 2022, and then goes back and forth and goes back over it again in late December of 2022. So the next year is going to be quite significant for this country and overall for the development of the superpowers of the world, economically and otherwise.
One of the things I thought was fascinating was how gold went up so much in value. Isn't that sort of a Plutonian thing? When it moved into Capricorn.
Anything that's hidden beneath the surface, or you have to dig. Digging is very Plutonian, by the way. Pluto, the theory is mythologically, Hades or Pluto hid a lot of his treasures or gold or jewels deep in the earth, and he had to, and it made it even more valuable or treasure-like if you found them, because it took so much work to get at them in the first place. So anything that you have to dig at is Plutonian in nature overall.
I was wondering if that could be good for treasure hunters.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That maybe there could be some interesting discoveries in the world of treasure hunting, or maybe also more discovered about cities that have sunken into the ocean. Because
Absolutely.
There's also one of the things I haven't really done a lot of, but I started thinking that, the planets have their own evolution that aren't necessarily related to Earth. And so I was thinking perhaps discoveries that affect space and cosmos would be interesting to see when some of these big transits happen, not just how it affects people.
And if you think about Pluto in the U.S. chart, is very much buried by being in an Earth house and an Earth sign, and there's like treasures that are waiting to be discovered in this country alone, if you look at it that way.
Yeah, and like I said, it just seems like it might be the natural time to do it. Though I am kind of curious that it from my recollection, I think Pluto goes into Aquarius in 2024 the first time, and I'm curious as to what relationship that could have with coming out of Capricorn and moving into Aquarius, what that would be like.
Well, Aquarius is ruled by the planet Uranus, and I call it Uranus the rebellion planet. So when Uranus was discovered in 1789, and when it was discovered, all these massive revolutionary forces were happening, especially in the West. The American Revolution, 1776, French Revolution, 1789, and the Haitian Revolution was 1791. All these things were going on right around the time of Uranus. So we got a lot of things, most likely, with Pluto going into the Uranian-ruled sign of Aquarius. I think the emphasis is on Uranus more than anything else, more than Pluto itself.
So in a way, that would be the time more likely if there was going to be more civil unrest on a bigger scale. It probably would happen more at that time. But then when you think about the economic problems before that, it's kind of setting the stage for the potential of that to happen if we don't do something.
Exactly. Like when the coronavirus first hit, it set the stage in many, many ways that the U.S. could not be isolationist. It had to work with the rest of the world in getting this problem solved, which it hasn't done yet. But it very much is part of our concern. Hence, we found a vaccine already. I'm not surprised. I knew it would come within at least 3 months of. So I said November is when we would discover it, which is when it happened. But it's like every scientist in the world was focusing on this vaccinating against this disease overall.
So Joel had a question. He's asking if with the Pluto return, if you think it's going to be a recession or a depression like in 1928 or.
I think there's going to be something very similar to it, I would say, because Pluto's in the second house of money and material assets. It's going to be some shakeup that the whole country is going to feel. And I said a natural disaster, but I think it's highly rare of a natural disaster bringing a country together economically and otherwise. But you never know; it could happen. But it definitely could be considered a mini depression, something of that nature overall.
Yeah, and I think that I thought we had a crossroads which we got through more positively when we did elect Biden in, because it seems like, first of all, he's a Scorpio, isn't he? I think he's
yes, he is.
I like that about him. And, he knows economically, he seems to really take that very seriously, what's been going on. Whereas if we'd stuck with Trump, who knows what it would have been like. It would have been the worst disaster, I think, financially.
Yeah. And he really went against his Gemini sensibilities by ignoring it altogether, not even discussing it out loud or in public, the coronavirus and how it's affecting the society at large. So, but the great conjunction of 2020 took place in December, and that's when Jupiter and Saturn were in the same place of the sky. And when that occurs, usually it happens once every 20 years. When it does, politics change hands pretty much. It's a guarantee that it always happens, and exactly that occurred with the Trump and Biden administrations taking power.
I have an interesting sort of fact about when I looked at the last time I think they were in that sign together conjunct. It was like 1516 or 1516 or 18, something like that. And there was this weird plague.
The dancing plague.
The dancing plague. Isn't that bizarre? I like, wow, that's an odd thing. People couldn't stop dancing and they dropped dead. And was it France or Italy or?
Strasbourg, France. It happened very in a concentrated area in Europe.
I remember thinking like, oh, that won't be such a big deal. And boy, but they didn't, in a way, it was kind of a version of the pandemic in that, a smaller microcosm. And of course, people didn't travel like they do now.
Yeah.
So that
and
was...
like I said, I did an article called "The History of Pandemics," where I traced pandemics throughout most of history, and I covered the dancing plague and the Black Death. But scientists believe that it was mold on bread that affected these people. It was moldy bread, they theorized.
Oh my goodness. So
it's so strange.
So what do you think from your point of view, why is it there's a segment in the US and the world that just refuses to believe the pandemic is real? What aspect in at least the United States chart, is that the Neptune aspect?
I would say Neptune is really at the midheaven, the MH. So it's like very high up, and it's like people get blinded by this American idealism that we're number one, we're so great, make America great. It's like, make America great. We haven't been great in quite a while. As a matter of fact, we have a long way to go to be great again, shall we say. Dare I show my political coloring, but it's true. So the interesting thing is too, also, the sun is conjunct or next to Jupiter, and it's exalted in Cancer. So it's like we have this tendency to be, everything is golden in this country. There's nothing possibly wrong that could ever happen. The foundation is so rock solid gold, all the above.
Well, and there's also Venus there. Venus in Cancer, it's in 3 degrees of Cancer, and Jupiter's 5 degrees. So that's really fascinating to me as well.
Yeah, Venus and Jupiter are called the two benefic planets, which represent, luck, growth, opportunity, abundance, that type of thing. So Venus is right next to Jupiter overall. It's very significant unto itself.
And we were also sort of talking before the show about why is it that we haven't elected a woman as president, because the chart indicates we certainly could. I mean, it's kind of a little baffling, and maybe that shows we're really unevolved. It's an unevolved chart. So,
It surprises me to this day. And Cancer, if you think about it, really is at its core a feminine sign. Men who are Cancer, don't be offended by what I'm saying, but it's the sign of the mommy technically, or the mother sign, shall we say. So the fact we haven't had one by now, I'm quite shocked over it overall. So we
well,
should have had one by now, I think.
we should have, well, it could be the way people define the mother is sometimes limited, and when you look at it as the great mother, and who has many aspects in it, then it's another ballgame. But if you look at it just as mommy who takes care of the house and cooks, then that isn't the archetype of the mother.
But the deadliest force on earth is a mother of any type protecting her young. So it's like you're going to be dead 10 times before you hit the ground because the mother's killed you because you've gotten in her pathway of her child, that type of thing.
That's very true. That whole protective instinct, and I'm certainly not a believer that women are meant to be. They'll be better leaders. I just believe in diversity. I think nature succeeds through diversity. That's why we want to have diversity in our leadership. Whether it's we want to have African Americans or disabled people or indigenous, it's because diversity is healthy.
And that's where I'm really betting on the moon placement and being Aquarius, and that being as much of a melting pot of as many different types of cultures and peoples and types as possible. And so a leader emerging from that.
And I think that's part of some of the more the Hopi prophecies, the rainbow people, the idea that we're meant to come together from different groups, and that's really a very Aquarian value, is to accept the differences in us and all of us. And in order to do that, the first thing we have to do is accept our own uniqueness, which I know some people have struggled, and some because they've been, of course, abused for being unique. Whereas now we are in a period where there is more acceptance of some things that were really underground.
Yeah. And for as great as this chart appears on the surface, it's amazing to think how backwards on many levels this country has been overall compared to the rest of the world.
It is. And I guess it depends on, what mood I'm in, as far as when I look at the chart and I say, we got, basically the way I see it is we're still a baby country, and that we need to grow to the next level, though, if we want to sustain at least some of the good principles of coming together in this way, the great experiment, as they call it. So we otherwise, I think it's going to be not a great place to live. I mean, it's not for a lot of people. And,
exactly.
And it's only for some people that it's a great place.
Right. I'm a big proponent of everything in the universe has good and bad qualities. Nothing is all good or all bad. And when you look at the sun conjunct Jupiter, you think, oh, wow, it's really blessed. Oh, my God, that's great. It is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. But it's also a sign of intense naivete and just being naive at how the world works. And overall, just assuming things are going to work a certain way. And we need to evolve past that.
Well, as someone that has a lot of Cancer in my chart in the 4th house, one of the things Cancers struggle with, I think, is fear a lot. I mean, more than most people, anxiety and fear and
insecurity.
And that's something I think as a country we really need to work out, because that's why we often lash out at other groups, is really that deep fear of the other group taking away something that we think is ours, or we're just afraid of the unknown. And you can see the anger is often based on that fear.
Well, and we have the North Node in Leo in the 8th house. So it's like we're number one. We're the leader overall. We are the superpower. No one else is above us. It's that mentality in the North Node right there. Leo is the sign of leadership. And obviously a lion is a very fierce creature. So that can be a little problematic, especially now with cooperation being needed to work with the rest of the world.
So the North Node, now in a country, it's interesting to think about, like, what would the North Node be more archetypally in terms of a country? Is that the direction a country should be taking?
Yeah, it's what we should be aspiring to. So Leo is a leadership sign, but it's also a sign of like fairness, and may Leo kings have been represented through the use of like lion imagery and things like that, because it's noble and just and things like that. But when lion energy goes a little too far, it's deadly overall.
And then it's
And
interesting, it's in the eighth house.
yeah, the
Then
Scorpio house, which is like the house of life or death. So it's like we can be that way with competing countries, and we can be really, really. It's a bully sign. It's a bully placement overall.
Now, what I think could be positive is, a lot of times when there's a disaster and they do the musical performances to raise money, that seems like a very Leo eighth house positive thing.
Generous, yeah, generosity.
Yeah, and that transforming difficulties through performance.
And I love using World War II as a great example. So before Pearl Harbor, this country really we were like the 16th in the world as far as military forces go. We really didn't have a working military overall. We had no reserves overall, and we were very weak in our military forces. Pearl Harbor happened, and the whole country united with a set goal and so Germany was so powerful at that point. We had nothing even close to munitions manufacturing and all that stuff. We beat them in every aspect and every angle, and we overcame by being like we overcame fascism overall. The Second World War could have had a very different turnout if the United States did not have its people unite and act as one source towards a goal.
So you think that was related to the North Node?
And it's just the Cancerian effort of like, we're family, we're all in this together.
Yes, the family of man or woman or humanity. I think that's where we ought to head as a country, so that we start to include pretty much everyone.
When the war was started, pretty much all was lost. Like FDR was the president. He didn't dare admit what he knew. We were still using cavalry horses as military exercises. When we had our first military exercise in 1940, we used these shabby cavalry horses and like 2 tanks. That's all we had was 2 tanks at that time. And like, look at the superpower and military force we are now. It's like unbelievable.
That's an excellent point. No, I had no idea. So Joel is asking, going back to the Pluto return, is it time to move out of California? Do you think the earthquake? I think it's hard to predict where earthquakes are. Would you have to look at the cities or the state charts as well?
Yeah, I think so. But we are going to have some, I think, Earth activity coming up especially during that time period of February of 2022. I think there's going to be earth tremors like all over the place, and earthquake activity on the whole globe then. But the good news is, like, Saturn is in its ruling house, the 10th house, and it's in its best possible sign in Libra. So that really is a very stable and stationary placement for it to be.
Well, also, I believe in the power of group energy and thought, that perhaps people in their group meditations can help alleviate by having thoughts about the earthquakes hitting in places that are more remote. So you don't necessarily want to try to control what's going to happen, but maybe just sort of praying and putting a really strong intention. I believe that's going to be part of the Aquarian reality, is how we work with our mental energy with groups. And we can see the power of groups through social media. We can see.
And Aquarius is a sign of groups, and it's the last of the air signs. So it really does mentally work best with groups overall.
And the other, it's a good point to bring up, because one of the initial benefits of the pandemic was for the earth itself. It got a rest. And places were healing that hadn't healed for a long time. Animals were coming out. And I thought, why can't we start to maintain some of this? Because everybody was delighted by it, and that this healing is not just about us. It's an earth sign. It's about the earth, and
overall.
really saying, hey, it's not too late. We can still transform these things.
Yeah, definitely. And like I thought when the pandemic first occurred, like is this Mother Nature's way of like keeping the population in check, or like keeping so that we don't overuse our resources overall. But I don't really have an answer to that, but it could be part of that. But the power of mental ability and mental energy is quite significant with the sign of Aquarius, to say the least. And I think we're going to be able to do things with mentality overall that we never thought was possible before.
Yeah, and what's funny, I remember right before the pandemic hit, I was doing some readings, and the two main cards that kept coming up were the Empress and the Judgment card, which for me in the Crowley deck is Venus and Pluto. And I felt these cross currents of energies, like this high ideal and beautiful love and this darker, intense. And I remember I didn't understand it. And I now understand it a little bit more. Is that this,
I would say it's Jupiter and Pluto.
Yeah, I understand that. I was just saying that though we were talking about the, the aspect of Venus and also the Mother Earth, because I see also kind of the Empress as kind of Mother Earth,
absolutely
ish, is so that idea that there was some. Maybe you're right when you were saying about it's Mother Earth trying to get our attention and trying to help to keep the overall stability and health of the earth, even if it means it hurts us a little. But Mother Earth is thinking about everything, about the plants and the trees and the water and all of its children. And we are one of their children, one of the children of Mother Earth.
Yeah. And the thing that was really shocking with the pandemic that I discovered through my research was it takes place in cardinal signs. And if you think of cardinal energy, those are the beginning of each of the 4 seasons. And a pandemic is deadliest when a person is walking around infecting other people and not even realizing they're sick. It takes a few days for it to kick in. And that's how cardinal energy works best overall.
Ah, very interesting. I hadn't thought about the cardinal aspect of it. That's very good insight.
Yeah.
So we're getting a little bit closer to the end of the show. I did want to give a shout out to your website, Brad Kronen, KRONEN.com. That's where you can reach Brad. As I said, he has many books, all available on Amazon under his name. So take a look. And some of them are Kindle. So I got the Neptune in Kindle because I like to read at night with the light. And I'm running out of space on my bookshelves. I actually prefer books, but I don't have much space anymore.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So definitely check that out. And what do you think? Maybe some advice about the rest of this year for people through the Pluto return, if they feel, there's obviously been some mental health issues, understandably, for people, and what do you advise people do to get through these challenging but in some ways breakthrough time in history?
Well, I like I said, I consider nothing all good or all bad. And if there is a challenging period coming up, the thing I have to say is it's something to learn and grow from. As long as we do something with it and make a difference that is constructive and positive, it's all a very good thing. And sometimes things need to be taken from us. That's how we learn when things are difficult or challenging. We don't learn when things are handed to us on a silver platter or very easy breezy, that type thing.
Yeah, and that does go to the heart of Pluto, as we talked about earlier, being the planet of regeneration and healing and going down deep into the underworld. There's an interesting book by James Hillerman about dreams in the underworld, and it was one of the astrologers said that's one of the best descriptions of Pluto he'd ever read. It's kind of a difficult psychological book, I found, but it was interesting to try to understand the soul aspect of going into where Pluto is, that there's an element of growing as a soul.
Yeah, it's evolutionary. And it's not necessarily all death and dismal dread, shall we say, because it's Pluto. But we have to remember most importantly, it's the planet of transformational change. So whatever happens, we're meant to grow and learn and evolve from it overall.
Now, when people are going through Pluto transits versus Saturn, how can they know the difference in their own psyche? Like, what do you think? Because sometimes they seem a little similar.
I think Saturn shakeups are much more personally based. They're much more like offensive on a individualized level. Pluto is because it's so far reaching and so far out in our space, it has an effect on us, but not as intense as Saturn does. So things like deaths and things like that are associated with Pluto because not because we're not affected by it, but because they are less intense than other personalized Saturnian trials or events.
So do you think there might come out of the Pluto return some new political ideas that can turn into more like laws or way to...
Political and economic. So Capricorn being the sign of the economy, Pluto being there, it's going to undo or transformationally change everything that we saw as value or worth or money generating overall. So I think economically, we're going to really see some major changes coming up.
I wonder if there'll be that universal pay that I know Yang was it one of the political candidates here in the California. That idea we all get like a certain amount every month has been talked about and suddenly taken a little more seriously. Like we all get $1,000, and wouldn't that be great if that was one of the positive outcomes?
And the reaction to all that is, oh my God, we're becoming a socialist country. It's communist, socialist, that type of thing. And that's the negative side effect of that Jupiterian conjunct Sun viewpoint of everything we do is super great and good. Everything we do is great and overall positive. It's like we overreact to things that have remotely outside of our scheme of how things work.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I've since I've lived in Canada, I don't understand why people are so afraid of a socialist country. So.
And if I hear the word socialist one more time, I'll scream. I'm like, do you even know what that word means? I don't think so,
No, I don't think they do, actually.
Yeah.
It's the same with the whole healthcare situation. Oh my God, universal healthcare, that would be a terrible thing. Like, really?
Communist. So like, okay, whatever you say, sure.
So, well, we'll see what happens. But I mean, in a way, we've been preparing for it for a while with the Pluto return. But I do think it's an eventful year ahead for us as a country.
Yeah, and the other thing is too is like we are currently. I mistakenly assumed the age of Aquarius began in 1969 when we landed on the moon, but really it has recently just come into play here. And with that, I think Aquarius being the last of the air signs, air energy is mental or rational energy. I think we're going to be able to do things with our minds overall. And I think that the world's going to greatly change how we use our resources going forward.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do that, it seems like, from what I can tell, as far as the whole resources go. But yeah, I think that, we're moving into the period for frequency and vibration to actually change things. And evidently that's going to be, I read somewhere, one woman was saying this is going to affect healthcare a lot too, how we heal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they're already doing things with sound and getting rid of tumors through sound. And so there's, behind the scenes, this has already been starting up. We've been in that, I feel like we're still in that cusp period between Aquarius and Pisces.
And sonar waves and anything sound related is Uranian in nature. It deals with the planet Uranus.
So I never thought of that. So actually, we're getting pretty close to the end of the show now. So I want to thank you, Brad, for coming on and having this great conversation about...
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We'll have you back again. And thank you all for listening in. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. And have a great week.